Hi, this is Paul. I wanted to try something else on my channel that I haven't really done much of this kind of thing on my channel. I know a lot of other pastors do. But I dropped into the Nuance Forum, which is a group that is in Nashville and sometimes Santa Barbara, a friend of mine. Some of you know what it is. It's sort of like the meetups that I'm doing. And I was asked a question. And in a group like that, I have maybe a minute or two to give an answer. And people are looking for yes and no, but I don't find yes and no to be terribly helpful with the myriad of situations people find themselves in. And that will annoy some of you. And if I ever get to the end of this little treatment of this subject, it will annoy some of you. But yeah, that's the way it goes. Annoyance is at least 50% you. So here's how the question went. It's a very common question. One person shared, this person was raised Catholic. Sister came out as gay at some point as an adult, maybe in her 40s. Coming out didn't go well with the parents. The parents were Roman Catholics. There's a vote that came up in that state on same-sex marriage, and the members of the church were putting a lot of pressure on this person's mother to vote against legalizing same-sex marriage. This is obviously before the Supreme Court decision. But the mother was torn, and she was torn. She felt social pressure in the church to vote against it, but she didn't really want to, I think the words were something like, do that to her daughter. So again, it is so easy to rush to a binary judgment on something like this. And again, there's a time and place for binary judgments in this world. I'm not even saying there isn't there, but there's actually a lot along the way that if you don't just jump to a judgment and run off, you can learn. And actually, I think we can have bigger, broader conversations, even though when it comes to decisions like this in denominations, sometimes it does come down to binary judgments. But as you know, I've posted a few videos on my channel, conversations about this question. Many conservative denominations are wrestling with these issues. Others are not. So I wanted to do a little treatment of it. So one of the things that I said to this person in the context where you only have a minute or so to respond is that, well, then this person did a little processing. We'll get to the next thing in a minute. This person did a little processing aloud, and he said something that I agree was, you know, the Bible has a lot of rules in it that we no longer believe. We eat shellfish. We have fabrics with two different materials woven together. So if we don't believe those rules, why do we believe rules about same-sex behavior? We no longer think that there's anything wrong with being gay or other areas of sexual ethics. So this is something sort of like scientific knowledge that we've evolved beyond. The church should catch up with the times and support gay people. And again, these are very, very common responses I hear in conversations in the church, conversations online. You'll get those in the Christian Reformed Church. We have a synod where such issues get discussed. These are points that get brought up there. And then, Paul, what do you think? And I always find questions like that. I mean, I sort of feel like Jordan Peterson being asked about God, because I'm going to give you a short answer and you really sort of want to pigeonhole me on one side or another. And there's actually a whole lot behind this that the binary answer does not really disclose or consume. I'm just checking messages that come into me. So there's a lot here. Common responses on the other side are, the Bible says marriage is between one man and one woman, so that settles it. So that's what the church should decide. And again, I'm not saying that's a bad answer. I don't think it's the best answer, and I don't think it's a helpful answer in a lot of contexts. God's law forbids same-sex equality or sexuality, so that settles it. People need to obey God's law or face hell. These are common responses, and again, these might be some of your responses. You're welcome to them. But I don't find that these necessarily facilitate the kinds of conversations that people need in order to process. And I think there are some reductionistic aspects about these responses that make them limited and or problematic. Pastorally, I think actually these responses set us on a difficult path, one where one that has brought the deconstruction of faith to a lot of people. And I think when Christians don't give good answers about things like this, I think this sets up the kind of dynamics that we see in people walking away from the faith. And how many times it comes up with the Rhett and Link conversation, how many times doesn't this issue in the last 10 years, people identify this issue as a reason they left the faith? Okay. Why? Well, I think we should get into what's behind these issues. The answers, like some of the challenges, have some validity, but they set us up for a lot of gotcha debates. And again, those kinds of debates I don't find really help a lot of people think more deeply about the issues that are at hand. And as with many difficult questions, there are enormous issues beneath the surface that don't necessarily directly relate to the specific answer, but are important in wise people formulating wise responses to the myriad of individual situations we can face. And again, part of the difficulty with a binary answer is, okay, so you believe that same-sex marriage is against God's will, but now it's the law of the land, and your son or daughter or mother or father or cousin or friends are married. Should you go to the wedding? How are you supposed to think about that? And in fact, lots of other issues will come down the line that your binary answer won't necessarily help you formulate a great response, and that will, even if there are differences, facilitate a relationship. So in other words, we need to go a lot deeper. More background is helpful for having a more productive conversation that affords more agency on all sides, okay? And so now we're using some fancy Vervaeke words here, but more agency is a good thing. And I like that. I like that way of talking. And I want more agency on both sides. That's different from more power. It's different from more ego. We want more agency on both sides. All right? A lot of this has to do with the Bible for a lot of different reasons. And the Bible, because of the shape of evangelicalism in the United States, comes front and center in this debate. And so before we talk about how the Bible treats subjects that are pertinent to this discussion, we should first talk about the Bible itself. What is the Bible and how does the Bible work? Now, all of us engage in these conversations from a point of view. I come to it from my own religious tradition, which is the Dutch Reformed tradition. It's interesting that the side of the Dutch Reformed tradition that I come out of were deeply shaped by two theologians, Abraham Kuyper and Herman Bavinck. And what's interesting about both of these individuals is that they were in some ways early predecessors to what became what was called neo-Orthodox. And I wouldn't categorize either Kuyper or Bavinck as neo-Orthodox, but they in some ways were dealing with some of the same challenges that neo-Orthodoxy would arise to challenge. And I think they dealt with it in a more conservative, traditional, and orthodox way than some aspects of neo-Orthodoxy eventually did. And so Herman Bavinck and Abraham Kuyper were both instrumental figures in the shape of the religious tradition that I inherited. Now, there are great commonalities between many historical Christian traditions, but also some differences. And when it comes to human sexuality, there will be some differences with the Roman Catholic tradition that I'm aware of. Sure, there are traditions with the Orthodox tradition, which I'm less aware of, but I'm coming to it from a historic, one might say a semi-magisterial Protestant tradition. All right, for those of you who know those words, there are the words. many more contemporary traditions that many people in American evangelicalism are within, I think, have a lot of common pitfalls that don't necessarily deal with the issues in as integral a fashion. All right? The answers tend to be more binary, more bombastic, more reactive. And my denomination, as it has wrestled with this issue, I think has really tried to be less biblicistic, more holistic, more integral. Now, again, because of where my denomination stands, some of you will say, you know, forget about you, and others of you will embrace it. That doesn't mean that much to me, actually, because I don't find it terribly helpful. Because if you know anything about my channel, I would rather have a long conversation with someone I disagree with and learn something from them than to have an agreeing conversation with someone I do agree with, which is really rather dull, and I don't have a lot to take away from it. So this is the tradition out of which I work and through which I understand the Bible. Now, one of the things that our tradition holds is that the Bible is infallible, and I prefer that word to inerrant. I think inerrant gets us off on a wrong path. Not to say that I'm going to condemn you for your embrace of inerrancy. I just prefer the word infallible, because infallible basically says unfailing and faithful, and I think that's a better word for the way the Bible functions in our lives and in our world. It's a faithful guide for instructing us in a life that is pleasing to God, a life that shows gratitude to God for the gifts he's given us, because that's, if you watch any of my sermons, you'll notice misery, deliverance, gratitude. The law of God, if you look in the Heidelberg Catechism, falls under gratitude. We obey God not out of fear. We obey God out of a response of gratitude for what God has done for us. That's the posture. And the Bible affords wisdom, and the Bible is faithful in affording wisdom, and that's what we need. The Bible reveals how to enter into communion and relationship with God through Jesus Christ that starts now and goes beyond the grave. I think that's one way to talk about what Christianity is about. Now, the Bible is a library. It's written by a host of authors, and again, some of the early stuff from Jordan Peterson in his biblical lecture talked about that. It had that nice graph of all the hyperlinks. It's very true of the Bible, and the Bible is not only a library, it's in a sense a library that is an accumulated conversation over many centuries, over people who knew the older material very well. In another conversation, I noted that in many ways what the New Testament is an interpretive device for the Old Testament, all right? And there are other interpretive traditions of the Old Testament. Rabbinic Judaism is one, but in many ways the New Testament is an interpretive tradition of the Old Testament. Now, these books were developed and written, some of them quite quickly, others of them show signs of having been developed over a long period of time. Most of that process we know very little about. Christian tradition says it's inspired by the Holy Spirit. That's someone at my door. So the Bible is inspired by the Holy Spirit, and the Spirit of God shapes the Bible as God wants the Bible to be. And our tradition, my tradition, talks about there being two books, not just the Bible. The Bible is special revelation, and then the other book is nature, general revelation. And so you want to keep these two books together because they don't disagree with each other. Because again, if you look at all the stuff I've talked about with respect to God, they don't disagree with each other. So when there are difficulties between them, you work on it. And you're going to get it all right? Probably not, but that's the shape of the project. The Bible is not fundamentally a book of laws and rules. And anybody who looks at the Bible should notice that. There are laws and rules within the Bible, but most of the Bible is poetry and narrative, and then letters in the New Testament. And so that's the shape of the Bible. And if the Bible were a rule book that, it were merely a rule book, it would be a very different book. The Bible is written for us, not to us. Much of the Bible is written to particular people at a particular time, and many of the rest of us are overhearing the conversations that were going on in it. Now, imagining that the Bible is fundamentally a list of rules is a reductive reading, because that usually gets spelled out theologically, that if you keep the rules, you earn heaven, and if you violate the rules, you face hell. And that's a very low-resolution, simplistic view of the Bible that my Christian tradition does not really embrace as such. That's a reductive vision. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And so, again, people, when they say, well, the Bible says no to these kinds of behaviors, you do these behaviors, you go to hell. That's reductive. All right? The Bible and morality. Biblical authors address moral topics in a diversity of cultural contexts, and that's really important. So actually in this video I'm going to be speaking mostly about the world of the patriarchs. But again, just by virtue of the way the Bible is constructed, there are moral topics that are addressed, come from the world of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all these stories in Genesis that you probably listened to Jordan Peterson talk about. There's the Mosaic Code to Israel. And one of the early things that I did, one of the things I did in seminary, which I found to be a very interesting project, is they have laws in Exodus and laws in Deuteronomy, and you can do this in English. Just do a close, careful reading of them and notice the movement between them, and notice the drift. What seems to be different in Deuteronomy than it is in Exodus, and notice the patterns of that, and you can get ideas about, well, what's really going on in these books, and where do these books come from, and what's going on. So that's just a simple way to notice that the rules of the Bible were intended to address different cultural contexts. Then there's Israel among the nations. You have the period of the Israelite kingdoms, the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, and the kings there and the prophets. And then you have Israel as a vassal of the empires, conquered by Assyria, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom by Babylon, and then Persia. And then you have the intertestamental period where they were subject to the Greeks, and then by the time the New Testament sort of pops into the story again, they're in subjugation to the Romans. And you can find Jesus teaching first in the first century to Jewish individuals in the Jewish community under the Roman Empire. There's a context to that. And of course, Jesus is very much in continuity, talking about not only the Old Testament that we have as such, but the tradition of the elders and the various traditions that were going on in this Second Temple period, as it's called. And then you have Paul teaching Gentile Christians how to live lives pleasing to God in the empire. And a lot of those teachings will be in the epistles. And you have not only epistles from Paul, but the other epistles in the New Testament. So what you see there is that, again, these aren't just a list of rules just given generally out in the world to nobody. These are conversations and rules and guidelines and stories and poetry and all of this stuff written to a whole diversity of situations over a large number of time, a large amount of time. And it's also helpful to know that the books that we have that might be addressing a certain time might be written in a later period, so then you've got those situations going. And what the kinds of things biblical scholars do is that they study all of that complexity. So context is important in morality, and you'll find differences in all of these contexts. Christian teachers try to suss out more universal principles from this diversity of contexts and diversity of data that's going on. And again, this is just very common in Christianity. The Apostle Paul worked through issues like this. Church fathers worked through issues. Christian pastors and theologians for the life of the church have been wrestling with issues like this. Now, one of the things pause. The older I get, the more curmudgeonly I'll probably become. But one of the things that has annoyed me for a long time was a lot of the talk about family values. And so Christian radio was family radio and safe for the whole family and on and on. Focus on the family was James Dobson's thing. And well, the Bible reflects family values. And when I'd hear that, I just think, you know, you're really hard pressed to find a happy family in the Bible. And especially some of the families that we pay the most attention to, a lot of them in the book of Genesis during the era of the Patriarchs, it's really a mess. And the Bible isn't telling these stories to hold up models of what goodness looks like necessarily. There are such things in the Bible, but a lot of the stories about marriage and family life in the Bible, they're pretty grim. And even though churches are really sloppy with their language, if someone came into your congregation that had a marriage like Jacob, it probably wouldn't be allowed to join the church. So, you know, let's stop being so simplistic about this, because people have eyes and they can read the Bible and they say, well, Jacob had 2 wives and they were sisters, and then had maidservants for these wives and had children with all of them, and pretty much only the sons get recognized, and Dinah, and that doesn't go well with poor Dinah, and then what follows with Shechem, that doesn't go well. You know, in past ages, when there was a higher level of biblical literacy, people read the Bible for themselves and they read these stories. And if you read enough of these stories and you read them within a tradition of reading and understanding the Bible, they make sense. But if you just if you come to the Bible with all of these simplistic assumptions that I often hear on the lips of celebrity atheists, and, you know, in all fairness, they got them from the lips of simplistic Christians, no wonder it's a mess. No wonder you have those silly debates and arguments about things that that nobody should really take seriously. So let's talk a little bit about marriage and the patriarchs. Polygamy was the norm in the ancient world, as it's been through much of human history, in many places around the world. And polygamy is a whole separate conversation that I'm not going to get into, but it was the norm, and there's plenty of polygamy in the Bible. Slavery was the norm. There, I said it. It was simply assumed. Now, people say, well, the Bible doesn't critique slavery. I would point them to the book of Philemon and say there's a devastating critique of slavery in the book of Philemon. But again, if you imagine that the Bible is a list of rules, you won't find a no slave rule in the Bible, the likes of which you would imagine. But the Bible doesn't communicate that way. And so whenever I hear someone say, well, the Bible should have made illegal, what, the internal combustion engine? Because now I'm going to get the comments about CO2. Doesn't matter. It's just an illustration of the Bible doesn't work that way, and we don't even need it to. And if it did, it wouldn't help, okay? Just because of how people are, and how people are formed and shaped, and the way history works, and the way human community works. So polygamy was the norm, slavery was the norm, and as is true almost universally around the world, you know, there is diversity of marriage, but generally speaking, marriage as a universal institution throughout the ancient world had a similar shape. And the purpose of marriage was for the creation of legitimate heirs. So when people come to me and they say, well, should same-sex marriage be illegal? The first question I'll usually answer them is, tell me what the purpose of marriage is. And let's start our conversation there. And right away they take a step back and, well, I don't want to talk about the purpose of marriage. Well, can you tell me what the purpose of marriage is? And then they'll say something like, well, to make people happy. And I'd say, well, it certainly failed most of the time then, doesn't it? What is the purpose of marriage? Well, that's not necessarily an easy question to answer. And the question has been answered many different ways throughout time. So if you want to start making easy assumptions about who should and shouldn't marriage, you might ask a question about why they should or shouldn't get married and what marriage is for. Well, pretty much universal marriage commonly in the ancient world, all the way up until really fairly recent times, marriage was for the creation of legitimate heirs. And heirs were important. Heirs were important in terms of property rights, and heirs were important in terms of understanding families as principalities, understanding families intergenerationally. Okay, and I'll return to that a little bit in the main illustration we're going to look at in this video. Slave girls' reproductive functions could be appropriated by their mistresses. And again, if you read the book of Genesis, you'll notice that Leah and Rachel both were given 2 slave girls, in a sense, as wedding gifts from their father Laban. These And you say, well, women weren't allowed to hold property. That's not really exactly true. And a lot of these assumptions about property and legality and the state's involvements, a lot of these things are our projections back. Now, it's certainly the case that women in the ancient world didn't have the same kind of rights, but they didn't have the language of rights either. But if we're to use that language and take it back there, women had cards they could play against their husbands if they wanted to. Okay, women weren't just chattel. At least wives weren't just chattel. Slaves might be, but wives weren't. Wives had legal protection from traditional marriage assumptions and traditions. Okay? So Rachel and Leah come into this relationship with two slave girls, and these slave girls can be called upon to bear children for their mistresses. That's the function they're playing. You see that in the story of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. Sarah takes her property, who is Hagar, and gives Hagar to Abraham to have him sleep with her. In a sense, what Sarah has done is appropriated the womb of Hagar. Now, in modern terms, we do this for hire. We do this legally. We do this under contract, and we do it for money. So I know we get all up and mighty about, oh, we don't believe in slaves. Yeah, but we might not buy people, but we sure do rent them. And we rent their wombs, and we rent their bodies, and we rent them for all sorts of things we want out of them. So do we purchase people? No. Do we rent them? Yes, we do. So let's not get too self-righteous about some of these situations. You also have to understand the siring function of a man in a relationship like this. When Sarah brings Hagar to Abraham, could he have said no? Maybe. But what Abraham couldn't do was deny his wife his reproductive function of impregnating her for her own welfare. That's a part of the traditional picture that's in the picture. Now, do we recognize it as the laws and rituals and rights that we have today? No. But there are things that impinge on the man and things that impinge on the woman, and together that's how society works. So it was Abraham's duty to lay with Hagar because Sarah was barren and couldn't bear children. It was Jacob's duty to sleep and have sex with, how much sleeping's going on, I don't know, but to have sex with these maidservants of Rachel and Leah. And in that sense, well, the man is the stud, he's the sire, and, the chattel are brought in and their reproductive systems are owned, not rented, and off it goes. But now, what tends to happen, though, is if you're a slave and you produce a legitimate heir, you tend to have a little bit of status. And that's exactly what happens in the story of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, that Hagar starts to feel a little bit of status, and Sarah doesn't like it. And that's where that story goes. Now, the biblical narrators sometimes offer subtle moral commentaries on these practices. And again, this is part of the beauty of narrative, because unlike the simplistic, reductionistic assumptions that, oh, Abraham was a polygamist and Jacob was a polygamist, narrative embodies and sort of sets the conversation in a certain realm. Now, we can look back at that realm and say, I sure wouldn't want to live there, but I think if the patriarchs looked at our situations, they would have their own moral critiques for us as well. Morality is set within a worldview. Now, you don't get blanket Christendom moralizing on these people for their lack of moral evolution or enlightenment. At least you don't get much of that in the Bible. The Bible is far more nuanced and actually understanding that cultures change. In our culture, we like to think and pat ourselves on the back, oh, we understand the relative situations about certain people in other cultures. Yeah, we do, until we get moralizing about something. And then suddenly, it was horrible that colonial power sent missionaries into the developing world to tell people to do this and do that for moral reasons, when We do exactly the same thing as a culture and a country. And if another country doesn't follow our moral ways, we have ways of punishing or trying to encourage what's right upon people, whether it has to do with rights of women or rights of all kinds of other things. We're not less moral or not less morally imposing, perhaps, than our colonial predecessors of 100 or 150 years ago. I think we just have different things that we moralize about. And again, in the Bible, there's not necessarily a lot of moralizing going about these things. And the moralizing that the Bible doesn't necessarily reflect our moral preoccupations. Celebrity atheists, in this way, in many ways, are a product of Christendom. They're a product of those same colonialists that they complain about, because that fashion of moralizing is very modern. It's very universalist. And so when an ancient person watching celebrity atheists moralize about the immorality of the patriarchs would probably look at them and say, boy, you're a bunch of black and white moralists, aren't you? Oh my, there we go. Having said that, was there a double standard between men and women? Yes, there was. I would assert that there continues to be a double standard between men and women. I just watched a very interesting TED Talk given by a woman who's a divorce lawyer, and she notes some of the double standards that continue to go around between men and women. And generally speaking, I would assert that there will always be double standards, and we usually complain about the double standards that we don't like or that we believe are unfair to our half of the equation. But yes, there are plenty of double standards, and probably nobody hearing, myself included, watching this video would care to live in the ancient worlds. We prefer the double standards we have to their double standards. Men and women were subject to different sexual norms because of the norms and certain biological realities. This had everything to do with the concerns of lineage. Again, I just did a conversation today, which I will post tomorrow, which will come out probably before this video. But I should find exactly the phrase that the guy I was talking to used. Hang on. We had a conversation about religion as risk management, and basically, how do I ensure the survival of my heirs? Now, that's a really interesting way to put it, because conceptually that was a big issue for the people of almost all throughout the Bible. About the worst thing that could happen to someone would be to be cut off. And what they meant from that would be to, let's say, perhaps become castrated and to have no children, and maybe to have your line wiped out. Now, what is that about? That was a way of continuing one's trajectory through history. And I'll probably do some videos on that, because that's a really good way of understanding the question of, well, what is a human life? And in line with, a bunch of the stuff that I've, really helped learn from Jonathan Peugeot, when you think about what a principality is, you think about someone's influence. Today we tend to use the word legacy through time. And so men and women were subject to different sexual norms because of the norms and biological realities of the day. A lot had to do with lineage, with maintaining a line through time. It's one of the ways that humanity was able to defy death. It's what life is about, if you go back to that Chesterton piece that I talked about in my last video. And there's a principality characteristic about a family and about a nation. So not only are we many inside, but we congregate as human beings to become many through time. And so it was a real deal. You could adopt children. And again, you find these concerns in the Abraham story too. Abraham, would Lot be his heir? Would his servant be his heir? And because Sarah wasn't producing, and well, Hagar, no, not Ishmael. So the Lord keeps coming to Abraham and say, not Lot, not your servant, not Ishmael. I'm going to give you an heir, and through that heir, the whole world will be blessed. And that's the promised Isaac, who is laughter. But also, of course, property rights. So marriage was focused upon lineage, legacy, defying death in that way, and also property rights. And that's what marriage is for. And so men and women functioned in different ways in this. And this is why the man had an obligation to impregnate the woman, and the woman had an obligation to bear children. And a lot of life centered around that. Now, again, if you read Ross Douthat's book on decadence, a lot of that book is committed to the question of reproduction, which is really interesting in terms of decadence. And he asserts basically that when reproductive levels in a society diminish, decadence ensues. That's fascinating because, you know, why have a large family? Well, I have 5 children, which is now considered a large family. 100 years ago would not be considered a large family. People having just 1 or 2 children, even the spirit in which they have those children is decadence. I'm going to have a child because this fulfills me. That's a very decadent way. Not that Abraham's desire to be the father of the nations was any less ambitious, but having merely 1 child would be seen as decadence. It'd be that child was sort of a tasty dessert that you would enjoy. Whereas many children, that was seeking another plan. Now, men had more freedom. There's no question about that, but not limitless freedom. Okay, men couldn't do just anything they wanted to, and as Jordan Peterson pointed out, in a polygamous society, in fact, it's usually only the highest status men they have access to most of the women, and low status men don't have anywhere near as access to women. So these simplistic conversations about patriarchy, they're really not terribly, they're really disingenuous, and they're not terribly honest, because in a patriarchal society, if you are a low status man, in many ways you have it worse than a woman, because you're just fit to be a slave or a soldier, and that's it, and you don't get an opportunity to transcend death and live over time. Now, women were more bound by some of these concerns and values. Purity was important, again, because we're thinking about lineage, heirs, inheritance, property rights, and they, as is true today, because of physical strength and because of male sexual desire, are more vulnerable in ways that men are not. That's a biological fact that in many ways the modern West has delightfully transcended. Countries should be proud of the fact if a woman can walk down the street unmolested and undisturbed because of male sexual desire. I think that is an achievement and an accomplishment. And this is where, you know, my view on the culture war and the competition between men and women, you know, these lines don't fall in simplistic and reductionistic ways, and we shouldn't treat each other as though they do. Let's talk about the Bible and authority. The Bible invites inquiry and conversations on these matters. I said that the Bible is, in a sense, a library, and what that means is, in many ways, the Bible is the library of these conversations, and God is a partner in these conversations, and you find God posturing himself like that. Now, God number 2, I'm going to talk about God number 1 and God number 2. Now, someone in the Discord server did a great page write-up explaining what I mean by God number 1 and God number 2 better than I could do, which is exactly why we need each other and exactly why I don't make little clips of my videos, because I don't know what would be helpful, because truth is, some of you listening to me know what I'm teaching better than I do because I'm too close to it. So the Bible invites inquiry and conversation on matters, and there's this delightful story in the book of Exodus where God and the angel of the Lord and 2 other angels come down, and they meet with Abram, and that's when Sarah laughs, and this whole thing, and then the 2 go off to Sodom, and 1 stays to remain, and this is the angel of the Lord. This is God himself in some sort of pre-incarnate package, and God says, Shouldn't I let Abraham in on what's going on and what I'm going to do? I should. And he and Abram have this conversation. And there's a textual difficulty in that text because, and the rules of textual criticism basically say you should often prefer the harder reading, because basically the Lord stood before Abram. And anybody who knew the ancient world would say, no, Abram should stand before the angel of the Lord. But the angel of the Lord stood before Abraham, and they talk about and they discuss, should God destroy Sodom? And Abraham says, far be it from the Lord of heaven and earth to sweep away the righteous with the unrighteous. If there are 30 righteous people in Sodom, will you spare the city? Yes, I will. And Tim Keller has a great sermon where Abram doesn't dare go down to one. And then, of course, Tim Keller will link that to Jesus, and that's a really nice pastoral sermonic trick that Tim Keller does. So if you can find that sermon, find that sermon. So, but the God of the Bible is not a tyrant that doesn't listen to human beings. Again and again and again in the Old Testament, the cries go up against Nineveh, and that's why he sends Jonah. And there's this theme that God is not in the cries go out up to God of the tyranny in Egypt. And so the image of God is in that way despotic, in that his power is limitless, but God is not despotic in terms of his character. And God is subject to human influence. And that's a very strange thing, but it's a very good thing. And so God weighs in with authority, but is open to conversation and even influence. And of course, when the Greeks kind of come into the church in the New Testament period, this Hebraism is troubling to the unmoved mover of Aristotle. And why would the unmoved mover be moved by human appeals? But the Hebrews, no, God listens to us. God is subject to our influence. Now, we're far more subject to God, but God might have despotic power, but does not have a despotic character. Now, this is the kind of texture that the Bible has that most contemporary debates won't open up to. And that's really a shame, because when it comes to something like same-sex marriage, God has despotic power and despotic privilege, but does not have despotic character. And that should be kept in mind, because God is concerned with human flourishing. Difficulty we have is that we're not always real good at understanding what human flourishing should look like. Too many people want political victories instead of wisdom. And again, this is something I've deeply appreciated about John Vervaeke and his project, because we're not looking to win battles and have gotcha moments. We're looking to grow in wisdom and understand from each other, even when we have differences. And I think this is modeled in the Bible. And people say, well, Pastor, you're so open. I get my openness, I believe, from the Bible. Now, the Bible also can be extremely dogmatic, and I don't necessarily reflect that dogmatism too often. But the thing is that Jesus is really the one who managed to be way more tolerant and flexible, and also way more despotic in terms of his claims and power and privilege at points. And we have difficulty with that. We like balancing them. Jesus just has both. As Jonathan Edwards says, these diverse excellencies. And you can look at my conversations about Democrats and Republicans and strength and kindness. So, there are rules, authorities, and there are rules, authority, and limits with God. And Abram knows this. And when he, sort of debates with God, and Jacob will wrestle with God, the Bible is very comfortable with this, but there are, of course, limits. And it's the limits that an inferior understands when talking to a superior. It's not really, we and God are not equals, but God will, for his own pleasure. And again, you'll find this, and Jonathan Peugeot does such wonderful work with this. You'll find this in ancient stories where the king will dress up as a slave. And you'll even see it in this TV show. For a while, there was this TV show where the boss would put on a disguise and come be the janitor and learn what he will about his company. You find stuff like that in the Bible. And the boss who dresses like the janitor and mops floors, he's still the boss, but there's something very Yahwist about that move, and it's delightful. And of course, this gets manifest in Jesus, who is God and comes down in Philippians 2 to be the servant of all. So God plays many parts. He again is both the agent and the arena. Now, there's a lot of subtle commentary on the sexuality of the patriarchs, and Robert Alter, who is a Jewish scholar, this is a really wonderful book of his, The Art of Biblical Narrative, which really put him on the map and really launched the school of at least the contemporary school of literary criticism of the Bible. He was a Jewish scholar at Berkeley. He noted this, and he noted that in the ancient world, polygamy and primogeniture would be simply assumed by everyone, and within the text of Genesis, Robert Alter detects is a subtle critique of both, and polygamy is suggested to be an unhappy arrangement, and that surely comes through in the Jacob stories. The use of slave girls for reproduction is similarly unhappy. And it's interesting that it's not God who says to Abram, yeah, Sarah's got a slave girl. Why don't you sleep with her and have a child through her? And in fact, when Sarah does this, no, God doesn't accept it. No, Ishmael's not it. Sarah, you yourself will have a child. And she laughs. And so the angel of the Lord says, yep, and his name will be Isaac because you laughed. And we're all going to enjoy the joke. Read Frederick Buechner on that. There's a constant upending of primogeniture in the book of Genesis. And you'll notice this, that, of course, Isaac has Jacob and Esau is born first, but Jacob will be the preeminent one. And when we dig a little bit more into the story of Jacob's sons, of Rueben and Judah and Joseph, well, the biblical text isn't just, as Sam Harris might want, saying bad, good. It's weaving a story because it understands that here within the narrative, often this is where we discover bad and good. And it's often the lessons we learn as we go that actually provide the deep kind of wisdom and context we need in order to make decisions in the myriad of situations that we face. And again, I think John Vervaeke's work on that and his articulation of that in his class was really, really good. So in subtle ways, the Bible invites us into moral inquiry. Now, again, some of you listening to this is, that Vanderklay, he's a liberal and he's setting us up. Well, I'm a Christian Reformed minister. That means I'm not as conservative as some of you want to be on some matters, and I'm not as liberal as others of you want to be on other matters. I'm in the middle in a lot of things, so don't jump to any conclusions here. Let the point land. In subtle ways, the Bible invites us into moral inquiry and consequential freedom. What you see in the Bible all the time is God doesn't weigh in and stop people from doing stuff. Go ahead, use your freedom. We'll see where it goes. God watches, as David watches Bathsheba. Doesn't lend a hand. God watches as David kills Uriah. God sends Nathan. Nathan tells a parable. You are that man. David was at fault, but the child dies. The Bible invites, in subtle ways, inquiry into morality and our freedom. That's the way it should be. Now, I want to use most of the rest of this video to talk about Judah. Judah will be the patriarch of the Jews, the tribe of Judah, out of which Jesus will come. Now, Jacob is, of course, a key patriarch. Jacob wrestles with God and is named Israel, and Israel becomes the name of the nations. And it's important when you read the book of Genesis that Genesis, in many ways, through these stories, sets the landscape and the context for Israel. And what you see is that, well, Esau, of course, with Edom, and Lot's children are neighbors. And so, in a sense, the book of Genesis sort of sets the familial context for Israel in the land. That's what the book of Genesis does. And again, Jacob is a key patriarch. He has 12 sons. Now, Jacob, of course, flees from his brother Esau, who wants to kill him. Remember what I said about family values and the Bible. Oh, here's a nice family, Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac is a weak father. Rebekah is a manipulative mother. And, you know, they both basically parent in such a way that one son has to run from his life from the other, and both have favorites among parents. This is not a happy family. This is not a good family. And I listen to a lot of stories from people with bad homes. I seldom hear stories as bad as what I find in the Bible about families, okay? So spare me the idea that pastors don't know what human depravity looks like. I read the Bible. It's right there. And, you know, celebrity atheists, guard their precious little eyes lest they see something dramatic. Please. So Jacob is a key patriarch and is renamed Israel. And he marries biological sisters, Laban's sisters. And Laban sets them up. Now, if you go forward a few pages, you'll notice in the book, in the Mosaic Code, that marrying sisters is illegal. Jacob does it. Israel is founded on not an incestuous relationship, but one not too far from it, one that is outlawed in the Mosaic Code. That is significant because, again, the Bible subtly invites moral inquiry and talks about us in ways that isn't simplistic or facile or often black and white. So right at the beginning of the story, Israel is the product of an unlawful marriage between Jacob and two sisters. And it's not a terribly happy marriage. And, you know, the whole story of Laban and Leah's, you know, bad eyes or not, or hard on the eyes, you know, shushes her in and, oops, Jacob had too much to drink. Oh, I married the wrong one, but I love Rachel. So another 7 years and 14 years of basic near enslavement to Laban, and then still Laban isn't going to let him out. I mean, the families are a mess, and the Bible is honest about this. And right there, the heroes are embroiled in the messy families, often not doing well. Abram as a father marches Isaac up the hill to sacrifice him. Isaac as a father sets Esau and Jacob against each other, a weak man. Jacob as a father can't keep control of his sons. It's a mess. So not a lot of happy families in the Bible. And then Rachel and Leah, they have a derby for sons, for Jacob's affection. Leah's just Leah, and then, okay, so Leah isn't loved, and so she has sons, and then Rachel can't seem to have children, so in comes Bilhah, and have sons through Bilhah. So first son born is Rueben, Simeon, Levi, and then Judah, and then Dan and Naphtali through Bilhah, and then Leah's like, Rachel with her servant's gonna beat me out of the derby. Here, sleep with my servant. And what is Jacob through this? He's a sire. He's like, oh, I gotta sleep with another slave. You know, did he want to? Did he not want to? Wasn't the point. The point was, Jacob, get in there. Do your job. This is going to come through in the Judah story. So Gad and Asher, and then Leah's still unhappy, so the Lord opens her womb. So Issachar and Zebulun, and then finally Rachel has Joseph, and at that point he's the youngest boy. And if Jacob didn't learn anything about family dynamics from his father, don't play favorites. Now little Joseph is my favorite. Let me give him a multicolored coat. And little Joseph is a brat bragging to his older brothers. And then Benjamin comes at the end. Oh, Benjamin. And of course, what happens? Rachel dies in childbirth. It's like a soap opera. So now Benjamin is the beloved child, and the other brothers just simmer in hatred over the whole thing. And Joseph comes out to the field to brag on them, to brag to them about the wonderful visions that he's had, how they're all going to bow down and worship him. And they can't stand it anymore, and they shred the coat, and they throw him in a cistern, and then they have a conversation. And it goes like this. When Rueben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Now remember, Rueben is the oldest, primogenitor. He is the most important son. He is the brother that all the other siblings should listen to because he's the oldest. They should follow his direction. He should be the oldest son, and he should play the role. Let's not take his life. He tries to do the right thing. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Blood incurs blood guilt. He's expressing wisdom. Don't shed blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness. Don't lay a hand on him. Rueben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. Rueben, the oldest, the dutiful son, is going to do the right thing. Will the brothers listen to him? Not a chance. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe. The ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and they threw him in the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites, cousins, coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt, the empire. Dum, dum, da, dum, dum, da, dum, dum, da, dum. Judah, son number 4, said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up the blood? There's no money in that. Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he's our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. Okay, what's the point of this? Do you need a little rule that talks about firstborn? No, everybody knows about firstborn. But look at Rueben. People don't listen to him. He's not the leader. Who's the leader? Judah is the leader. Judah is the man among men. We pay attention to status. Will the firstborn be preeminent? The will of God, number 1, is revealed in history. Rueben tries moral leadership, but is weak, like Isaac. Judah is like his father, Jacob, crafty, knows how to get his way, knows how to turn a buck, knows how to fool even old Uncle Laban and get out of town with his daughters and his daughters' servants and all of the sheep that he managed to manipulate so that his herds would grow. And then only by intervention from God get saved from his brother Esau. Judah is like father Jacob, but not Jacob's good side. So, after this, Joseph gets carted off to Egypt. Let's pay a little attention to Judah. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Abdullah named Hira. Okay, so that's getting a little crowded here. I'm going to go out and I'm going to make life on my own. I'm going to go out and I'm going to make a name for myself. Jacob left and made a name for himself. Now Judah's going to set out. There, Judah met a daughter of a Canaanite man. Ooh, he's marrying Canaanites. We all know where that goes, because if you read later in the Bible, remember, Abraham wanted his son not to marry a Canaanite woman. Sarah didn't. So go back, and Rebekah and Isaac, they marry. And then Rebekah's like, oh, don't marry one of these Canaanite girls. Esau married Canaanite girls. We don't like them. Go back to Uncle Laban, and goes to the well, and there's Rachel. And then got married with Leah. But anyway, so Judah's marrying Canaanite girls. Judah thought the only thing better than murder was slavery, because you can make money from it. Then Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son, whose name was couldn't have been too bright. She conceived again and gave birth to a son named Onan, whose name will live down in history. She gave birth to another son and named him Sheila. Sounds like a boy named Sue, right? Johnny Cash. It was Kezib that she gave it was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Just if you wanted to know a little bit of geography and put it on the map. Might have a little trouble finding that on a map today. I don't know. I haven't looked it up. Judah got a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. She's Canaanite too. So now we got 2 generations of Canaanite blood going on in here. And Judah seems to be pretty much lost to the ways of the world at this point. And her name is Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. And this is classic God number 1 stuff, because the Bible isn't intended to have us imagine that God strides down in a chariot and spears him with a lightning bolt or something. He dies young. That which happened is done by the Lord. The Lord sort of as arena and agent, but that's, again, this is a, I don't know, where's the book? Where's the book? This is an Israelite conception of God. So, well, the Lord put him to death. Well, what are you supposed to do then? It seems these traditions are kind of durable. Then Judah said to Onan, "Hey, Onan, come here. Sleep with this one." Ooh. Sleep with this one. Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. Remember what I said? What marriage was for? It's for lineage. And the idea is that although he might not have been too bright, his line shall not pass away. Through his widow, children will come. But now, this is not necessarily such a great deal for Onan, because that means that basically he has a child with Tamar, but it's going to be counted towards his brother. And, you know, what were relations like in Judah's family when what were relations like in his family of origin, and relations like in between Jacob and Esau? So family's a mess. And hey, Onan, do your business, because, you know, Tamar and my firstborn, he's dead. The Lord took him. He was evil, but he was still mine. We named him Have a baby with Tamar, and it'll count for son. And after that, you can get your own wife and go have babies. Well, Onan didn't just ignore her. He decided, well, let's play with Tamar. So Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. I want to have some fun with Tamar. She's kind of hot. But I ain't going to make her pregnant, because I don't want my line muddled up from good old who probably didn't like anyway. What a dumb name, What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, and the Lord put him to death also. Woo! And again, you know, this is God number 1. Now, it's important to remember that God looks out for widows. You'll find this again and again. God looks out for widows and orphans. Tamar's a widow. God put Onan to death because of how he treated a woman. So, evil patriarchy. Women never got anything. Nope. God put Onan to death because how he treated a woman. Well, now Onan's dead. Judah's paying attention, doing his theology on God number 1 here. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow with your father's household. Eat from his table. You're expensive to feed there. Live as a widow from your father's household until my son Sheila grows up." Yeah, what kind of a man will Sheila be? For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. Don't want to take a chance with this. Now, Judah is thinking about his own inheritance. Okay? Remember, this is how you transcend death. This is how you go through time. This is risk management. That's what children are for. And boy, Er's dead. Onan's dead. Sheila, Tamar, she's like Black Widow. I don't know if I can dare put anyone. So go back and live with your father as a widow. And when Sheila gets old enough, I'll send Sheila and he'll do the deed. And can you imagine what little Sheila's thinking about? Tamar? I'm going to do what with her? For what? Well, he's probably well aware. They're all watching animals do it and living in tents and stuff. You don't have to tell kids the birds and the bees. They watch it. Anyway. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. Oh, his wife died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, well, he loved her. He went to Timnah. It wasn't just loving, though, too. I mean, there was a period of grieving he probably had to do. This was the tradition. They had rules they had to follow. To the men who were shearing his sheep. Now, there's a lot of conversation in, you know, sheep shearing and harvest. And these are times of harvest and revelry and, you know, get drunk. And it's kind of like spring break for patriarchs, all right? So to the men who were shearing his sheep and his wife Hira, the Adullamite, went with, and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, went with him. So, okay. This was, if I recall, his father-in-law? No, this was who he stayed with. Wasn't his father-in-law. This is his old buddy. This is his buddy. So when he and his buddy, they're going to go down the sheep shearing like spring break. And you know, have a good time. When Tamar was told your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, because your clothing identifies you and gives you identity, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then went down to the entrance of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. Notice all the little details. They want everybody to know, yeah, this is where all this happened. This isn't just some story in a land far, far away. It's just points on the map that the readers could recognize. For she saw that although Sheila had grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. Ah. Tamar has rights, but nobody's ensuring the rights. There's no state here making sure this happens. This is Judah's job, and Judah's not doing it. And we know that Judah is not doing it intentionally, and that, yeah, Tamar, you go eat at your father's house. Judah is falling down on the job right and left, and Tamar's father isn't taking up her cause. Tamar is in a tough place. So Judah's managing God, number one, by keeping Sheila away from Tamar. And again, clothing indicates identity. Harvest festivals, kind of like spring break for patriarchs. And injustice is being done to Tamar. And no man will step in, not her father, not Judah. So Tamar takes matters into her own hands. When Judah saw her, she thought she was a prostitute. Hey, spring break for patriarchs. For she had covered her face. Not realizing that it was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." Is it really sleep we're going to do? "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asks. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock." You know, you don't have cash, so here, have a goat. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? Because I see you don't have a goat handy on you." He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and your cord." Ah, these are emblems of status and identity. If she possesses this, she, in a sense, has legal rights over him and his property. But, hey, his wife's dead. It's been a while. Spring break for patriarchs. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothing again. But, oop, this widow, things are going to start to show. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman. Say, hey, yeah, I didn't have a goat on me at the time, and I really needed something. So take the goat, find the prostitute, get my stuff back. Everything will be good. But he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute?" Big conversation in Old Testament studies about shrine prostitutes. But, you know, where's that certain kind of prostitute that was around there? You know, the one with the veil and, you know, had my stuff. I need my stuff back. I got to go. Well, beside the road at Enaim. There hasn't been a shrine prostitute here, they said. Uh-oh. So we went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her." Beside, the men who lived there said, "There hasn't been a shrine prostitute here." Then Judah said, let her keep what she has, or we'll become a laughing stock. Everybody will laugh about how Judah cut a bad deal because the seal and the pledge, the seal and the cord and the staff, a lot more valuable than a goat. So after all, I did send her a goat, and you didn't find her. I've done my business. Let's just sweep it under the rug and act as if nothing happened. Well, again, who is Judah? Well, he's got more influence than Rueben. He's crafty like his papa Jacob, but he's immoral, and he doesn't do the right thing. Now, again, there isn't necessarily an overt condemnation about sleeping with a prostitute here. It's a lot more subtle. Okay? Now we're going to see just how evil and, in fact, reformable, though, Judah is. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution. And as a result, she is now pregnant." Now Judah's going to be the moral pillar of the community and bring justice right quick to that daughter-in-law, and that, you know, putting that daughter-in-law to death would actually do him a favor. Yeah, all this stuff about power. You think preachers don't know anything about how powerful people use power to get their dirty work done? It's right there in the Bible. Plenty of examples of it. Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." Nice guy, that Judah. Sure you can't sell her for something? Is there money in it, Judah? As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these things," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Jacob gets tricked by Laban. Judah gets tricked by a woman, Tamar. She has mastered him. She has played him. And now not only the dirty little deed on the side of the road gets exposed, but his real moral character gets exposed. You are that man, Judah. Judah recognized them and said, Judah's evil, but he's also good. And he gets shamed into righteousness. And actually, towards the end of the book of Genesis, it will be Judah who steps up on Benjamin's behalf and says, "You can kill my sons if I don't bring Benjamin back." This is Judah's transformation. Remember when I did that video about transformations? I had some stuff from Vervaeke in there, and agency and addiction, and Jordan Peterson talking to the chaplain over there at Liberty. This is a transformation, and here it happens. And Tamar saves Israel. And the line right here, right now. Ruth will do it later. Bathsheba will do it later. And as I'll note later, these 4 women show up in the genealogy of Jesus because this character that these women exhibit is a central part of understanding Jesus' character. Oh, the Bible just is terrible to women. You don't read your Bible closely enough. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin sons in her womb. Twins? Where have we heard this before? Remember Rebekah, Esau and Jacob. And Esau comes out first, but Jacob's holding his heel. After as she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. That was one heck of a complicated birth given there. Puts out his hand, so the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on the wrist and said, "This one's out first. He's the firstborn, primogeniture. We must uphold the tradition." But when he drew back, his brother came out, and she said, so this is how you have broken out? And she named him Perez. And his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. So again, now you're going to note that Perez is the primary one, but he's not really the primary one because Zerah is in there. And again, this is what Robert Alter was picking up on. The Bible saying primogenitor, shmemogenitor. But he does it subtly. You know, oh, I need a rule that says it. You don't understand how to read the Bible, and the Bible doesn't care if you don't understand. Then again, get to the Gospel of Matthew, and Tamar is honored as a mother. As a mother. The woman who played the prostitute. Remember, she's a Canaanite. And she's the Canaanite to marry the son of Judah, who married a Canaanite. It's a mess. And the Bible says, I can deal with mess. I can deal with mess. You watch how I deal with mess. Remember the concern about lineage and principality? There it is. Tamar is included in Matthew's genealogy along with those other crafty women who saved Israel, those good women like Ruth and Bathsheba and Rahab. Perez will be a redux of Jacob, just as Judah was. Lineage and principality. Okay, why did I tell that story? The Bible talks about sex a lot. There's a lot of sex in the Bible. Sexual morality is a subject of, you know, you'd think these telemarketers would quit. Sexual morality is a subject of larger morality, like sex is a subset of life. The Bible is full of main characters who have really spotty sexual practices, okay? If in that way, it's funny because these moralists, these celebrity atheist moralists, are far more prudish than the Bible. The Bible understands cultural diversity and moral nuance and invites us into moral conversation about the Bible. It's not a moralistic, blunt instrument, contrary to see how you've seen many churches and pastors use it. The Bible invites us into these conversations and invites us to make decisions through them. Yet moral behavior is real and consequential. Actions have moral consequences, and God number one and God number two are not blind or unconcerned. Okay, remember, God number one and God number two are one God, but in both aspects, not blind and unconcerned. In some ways, it was God number one killing and Onan, and Judah's trying to avoid God number one, but God number two is watching and moving behind the scenes. And if you think about my conversation with Brett, this idea of agency, was God moving through Tamar? The book of Genesis says absolutely God was moving through Tamar. When Tamar decided to play the prostitute, God was moving through her. You think, I don't know how I feel about that. Well, the Bible invites moral inquiry, and let me tell you, do not play chicken with God, because he will go to depths that you think, oh, a good God should not go to. God will do what's right, and he will have his way. Students of Scripture should gain wisdom by noticing these things. Does the Bible talk about sex? Yes. Is sexual morality important? Yes. Is it the only thing? Hardly. Read the Bible. There's more to come, maybe. So what's the point of this video? Well, sexual morality, well, in future videos, perhaps, if this video goes well, and I've enjoyed doing it, so I'll probably make another one if I think about it. I get so distracted, and that's why my channel's so hopelessly ADHD. There's sexual morality in the Mosaic Law that touches on this debate. There's sexual exploits of King David that we've talked about a little bit. Jesus' commentary on sexual questions. Jesus has some pretty rough things to say about sexuality. The Apostle Paul's revolution of sexual ethics that Tom Holland brings up in his debate on Unbelievable and how to weigh in. Sexuality in the history of the church. That's a big, big story. Engagement between the Bible and culture again and again. Sexuality and identity. You can't imagine same-sex marriage without the Bible and Christianity. I've said this many times on this channel, and I'll say it again. The reason that same-sex marriage, and we talk about it and think about it the way we do here, is because of the Bible and Christianity and Christendom. Tom Holland gets that. I get that. A lot of people don't get that because they want to have this little simplistic thing in order to win their little argument. Now, again, you might complain, you spent this whole video talking about all these things, and you've hardly told us anything about what you believe about same-sex marriage. Well, get used to it, because if I keep up with the series, there'll be lots more. Then why am I doing it? Because you have to understand how the Bible works if you want to make a conclusion from the Bible about a specific subject matter. And understanding the sex lives of the patriarchs is important for understanding how the Bible and sexuality work together. You have to understand the context. Well, we don't see any same-sex behavior among the patriarchs. That's right, we don't. We'll get into it more in the Mosaic Law. You've got Leviticus 18 looming there, but that's an interesting chapter in and of itself. But people ask me yes or no questions, and they want yes or no answers. And if I'm sitting at the seat, and if I'm sitting at the CRC Senate or in classes and I have to vote a certain way, I'll vote a certain way. But there's a lot that goes on before I bother voting about any of this stuff. And I think all of this stuff is important and adds to the conversation. So give it thumbs down if you don't like the video because I haven't cleared up your thing. And you say, I'm going to wait 10 hours for Vanderklay to finally give me the answer from what he thinks. Well, so be it. Because the truth is, if I gave you my answer, it probably wouldn't change your mind anyway. That's the way these things go. But I had fun talking about Judah. I kind of missed my Sunday school class because this is what I like doing in my Sunday school class. So maybe this will be a way for me to get some of this stuff out of my system while I'm sort of pent up and missing my Sunday school class. So there you go. I promise you nothing from my channel that I've ever promised from the beginning. I said I would stop doing videos whenever I stop doing videos, and I'll do them as long as I like doing them, and I like doing this video. And what these videos are my rough drafts. So did I misspeak? Probably plenty. If I said things wrong, correct in the comment section. But that's what I'm doing, and I've had fun. Hope you enjoyed listening.